So this next part I'm going to do, I do have to drop the exhaust. Probably don't have to drop it all the way, but I'm going to take it all the way out. You notice on the one side, we've got a circle to fit on that flex joint on the headers. This side was different. So this is actually the first time I've seen something like this. This just must be a Mustang thing. So I think that side will hook up. We'll see. That side I definitely know has to be changed. I did go to the junkyard and get a F-150 flange to weld into place there. It was really easy. Of course, junkyards, they take out the catalytic converters, and all that's left is just that little piece right there. So loosen up the bolts, take them out, and I'm pretty sure I didn't have to pay anything for them. They gave them to me for free, so that was really nice. So, gonna drop the exhaust, line up the torque converter bolts to where it's up and down. I'm gonna do the same thing with the flywheel on the back of the engine. And I'm gonna try to reuse this 4.6 harness. I really hope it works because that's gonna save me a bunch of time. And as you can see right here, that flange that was in that car, it is not going to fit that. So definitely needs to be replaced. So now that the exhaust is out and the torque converter is straight up and down, I put a jack underneath the pan just to lift it up a little bit. And the wire harness, I have it tucked all the way around the side. I tried to get everything as much out of the way as possible. That way that engine can just drop right in. Since this engine does not have a block heater anymore, I am going to remove this wire. It's going all the way down this wire harness, back around and up next to the latch. So I'm going to take this out real quick and then we'll continue. The other thing that I'm going to do, since I have the engine out and it's right in front of my face, I'm going to clean up that rust scale a little bit. I'm going to put some 415 on there. The stuff right here works very, very good. POR stands for paint over rust, and it's basically to encapsulate it and to stop the rust from continuing. So I don't know how much I'll do. I know I'm going to do at least that spot, but I might get down here a little bit too and on the other side. So I'm going to get that done real quick as well. So something funny just happened. I had a pop-up canopy right here, and the wind caught it, and guess where it is? It's on the other side of the fence now. You can kind of see the legs right there. Just whoop. So I would go get it right now, but I don't want to invade my neighbor's privacy, so contacted them and they said they'd be able to get it in an hour. So till then, I'm gonna go eat some lunch and I'll be back out here working again. So now I have the engine off the engine stand and it's just about ready to go into the engine bay. I am going to put this spacer plate on it real quick. This is going to fit right here over the dowels. The starter does fit right here. So I did get one comment earlier saying, can you just remove the engine without removing the starter? It's because of this plate right here that you can't do that. So the flywheel or flex plate goes over this part right here, and as soon as you try to lift up, I suppose you could try to sneak it out right here, but you're going to damage this plate. And this needs to be on here when you're installing this, because I remember doing a 4-liter V6 Ford and I forgot to put this plate in there. And actually what ended up happening was the flex plate went farther into the transmission than it should and pushed that torque converter into the front pump in the transmission, and it destroyed it. So this plate is very, very important. So once you get this on here, one thing that I like to do just so it stays in place as you're putting it into the car, just take a center hole punch, and we're going to go right on the outside of this dowel here just to provide some resistance so this won't come off quite as easy. Do one side, then the other side. Once you get it around a couple sides, this is nice and tight on here. It's not going to come off. You can get it off if you'd like. If you're taking it back out for some reason, you can slide this off this dowel still. But that's a good way to keep this plate on there. All right. Now that this is in place, let's get our flex plate and install it. So since I'm doing a 4.6 to 5.4 swap, it is going to require a different flex plate. The flex plate we took off of the 4.6 is 6 bolts back here. The 5.4 is going to be 8. So one way to figure out where these holes line up, they are actually kind of keyed. It's only going to fit on here one way. If you see this hole right here, it's got like a little divot at the bottom. And these two are going to be a little bit closer together than the rest of them. So if you look right here, you can kind of see these two are very close together. So I can take those, put it up here, and I'm not sure that you can see this, but every single hole is lined up now. I'm just going to put one in place just to hold it in place. I am going to apply a little bit of RTV to these bolts just because some of these crankshafts have a hole that goes all the way through into the crankcase. I don't believe this one does, but it's just habit for me now. You just apply a little bit on the outside of these bolts, stick them in there, and then you're good to go. The other thing with applying a little bit of RTV is it's going to help prevent these bolts from backing out because we don't want this to loosen up going down the road. One thing we want to do before we drop this in the car, we want to make sure that one of our torque converter bolt holes is lined up with this top rib right here. We already did the transmission for the alignment. Once you do this, it should slip right into place. This torque converter is only using 4 bolts, but you'll notice that there's 12 bolts on this thing. I have seen a vehicle with 12 bolts on these flex plates, but that was only big conversion vans or something like an ambulance. All right, here's the moment of truth. Is this thing gonna fit in that engine bay? These headers are really wide. I may have to pull this back some, drop it down, and then maybe slide it back in. And man, is it snagging on this master cylinder. Wow. Okay. Whose brilliant idea was this anyway? Oh yeah, it was mine. Oops. Uh-oh. What'd I do? Oh, nothing. Okay. Just wire harness. Hitting the fuse box. Hopefully that slides past the fuse box. Ugh. That's tight. It's very, very tight. Ow. Okay. Come on, wire harness. Get out of there, you. Hitting the AC line on this side. Yeah, this is going to be... This is tight. Gonna do a little shake, shake. Or not. Okay. Do I have to remove the fuse box? Yep, I'm going to remove the fuse box because it is in the way. Alright, how do you get this thing out of here? Oh, it's like a bunch of tabs. Okay. And that sun is beating on my neck. Kind of wish I had that canopy back. Oh, looks like somebody's in the backyard. Maybe I'll get it back. Alright, fuse box is loose. Pulling it up over the battery tray. Let's see if I can drop this in. That is really tight. Come on now. Oh, get past that. There you go. All right. Come on. Okay, up. Is that high enough? Uh-oh. There it is. Okay. Come on, wire harness. So basically the wire harness is getting caught on this header and the master cylinder. So I have the wire harness up above it now. Should be out of my way. Let's see if we can drop it in now. So I've run into a snag. This engine is too large with the headers on to fit inside the engine bay the way it sits right now. What I'm going to try to do to get some room is I'm going to remove all the AC lines. There's a hole in one of the AC lines already, so the refrigerant's already gone. I do plan on getting the AC working eventually, but for right now, the main goal is get this engine in the engine bay. For the other side, I'm having an issue with the master cylinder and brake lines. I'm hoping I don't have to mess with those, but we'll see. If I have to mess with them, I'll mess with them, and then we'll bleed the brakes and call it good. But for now, I'm going to try to get these AC lines loose, out of here, out of the way, maybe the AC compressor too, and see if I can't get the room that I need. With all the AC lines out of the way on this side, tons and tons of room. That side, so the master cylinder, it's hydro boost, so you got power steering lines going to it, and they're pretty thick. And there's a block down there that I believe is a part of the ABS, but I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong. Maybe it's a distribution block. But anyway, let's try to drop this thing. into this bay with these AC lines out of the way. These brake lines, they're the metal brake lines that are in the way now. If you twist this thing, it goes down farther. But these brake lines are going to be in the way. So don't really want to remove them. But I don't know how else I'm going to get this in here because they're sticking out pretty far. It might be possible in this distribution block. There's one coming straight up, over, and down. I have a feeling if these lines are okay, I can just move that closer to the frame. Now, enough talking about it. Let's try to do it. Let me show you what I'm looking at. So as you can see, no more AC lines. They're all disconnected. On this side, I have this giant group of lines for this Hydro Boost system. And then you have these brake lines right here. And as you can see, I am rubbing up against this really, really bad. So I need to do something about this whole thing. So there it is. I pushed them in a little bit. The lines were okay. If they cracked, I'll deal with that after the fact of putting in the engine. So let's continue with trying to fit this mammoth in this tiny little space. Hitting the master cylinder again. I really get the feeling I'm going to have to remove that. Ooh, it is wedged. Wedged something fierce. Okay. As much as I don't want to do this, I am going to remove the master cylinder and the brake lines. It's okay though. It's a nice day. Nothing's broken yet, so things are okay. If I have to switch back to stock manifolds for the exhaust, that's what I'll do. Let's get this thing out of here and get that brake master out of here too. I know a lot of you are asking, why didn't you just stick with a Coyote? Put a Coyote in. I could have, but I like the sound of a modular. Had a good exhaust sound. 4.6s are amazing, but The 5.4 trucks aren't too bad either, especially if you put a original 40 series Flowmaster on it. Good sound. Very good sound. All right, I'm gonna get this master cylinder out of here. Probably some of the brake lines too. And I'll see you back here once all of this stuff is removed. So I got the brake master off, the Hydro Boost lines out of the way. I loosened the brake lines, kind of moved them out of the way. Fuse box is all the way over here. And of course, I have a pan down there, but I got fluid everywhere, and I'm gonna have to lay down there soon. So, cool. Great. Now, let's try to get this engine in. If it doesn't go in this time, I'm gonna have to go with stock 5.4 manifolds for the exhaust. Right, this is the point where it normally got stuck before. But these brake lines loose, should be able to push it back. Well, what am I hitting? There we go. There we go. Wow, that is tight. My goodness. It has come down to these headers are too wide to fit in this engine bay. Which I had a feeling. I wasn't exactly sure which headers to go with, honestly. But it is not going to go in the engine bay today. So what I'm probably going to do is try to find some stock manifolds, take these headers off, get the stock manifolds on here, and see if I can't drop this thing in. Once I get this thing in place, it's a mammoth. It's a beast. It is really, really big for this engine bay. Hey, the next day, we're back at it again. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to take these headers off. They are just too wide to fit into that Mustang. I have the engine on the engine stand. We're gonna take these off. These headers are meant for a 2-valve F-150. So maybe that's where the issue comes in. Maybe long tube headers would work. Maybe Mustang headers would work. At this point, I don't know. Don't really want to wait for new headers to ship. So I went and got stock manifolds. Not super thrilled about putting stock manifolds on this thing, but if I want to get this thing done in 2 days, that's what I'm going to have to do. So I'm going to take these off, put the stock manifolds on. If you remember, I did take the Mustang EGR port right here, that little screw thing. I did weld it to this header. So I'm going to have to come up with something different for the stock manifolds. It does come with the F-150 fitting right here. I'm not sure why they changed their design between 4.6 and 5.4. To me, if you make the same thing, it does make it a fully modular engine, but I'm not the engineer. So the stock manifold has the F-150 fitting right here. I do have an EGR tube that would fit an F-150, so what I'm thinking is once I get the stock manifolds on here, I'm going to have to take this chain off, put the intake back on, and then modify that EGR tube, probably cut the F-150 fitting off from the tube to fit here, weld it to our Mustang EGR tube. So we have a game plan. Let's get started. So here we have the stock manifold. I do have both of the EGR tubes hooked up. This would be stock location for the F-150 application. But what I'm thinking here, if I move this way and maybe cut right here on the F-150, maybe cut right here on the Mustang, kind of bend this down a little bit to fit inside, because you can actually see this EGR tube is significantly larger than this one. So I have a feeling this tube would fit inside this one if I cut it. So I'm going to try that. Just bend this down, cut it off right about here, and try to slip it in, and then I'll weld it around with my TIG welder. So the F-150 EGR tube does slip over the Mustang one, as long as the edges of the Mustang EGR tube aren't bent at all, like sticking out. But with this slipped over, just like before, I'm going to heat up right in here. Try to stay away from this little kinked part. This isn't terrible. Exhaust gases can still flow past this, so I'm not necessarily concerned, but I don't want to make it worse. So that's why I'm going to stick right around here. Grab this piece, try to bend it down, because where this thing sits is right above here and not exactly the right angle. So if I bend it right here, I should be able to fit this right there. So that one little bend was perfect for that to fit. So I'm going to weld this up real quick, and I'm probably going to take this heat shielding from the other EGR tube and stick it right here, because this is fairly close to this valve cover. Well, there it is, all welded together, and a ton of heat wrap around it, which is probably overkill, but it'll do the job. I'd rather have too much protection than not enough. Now it's time to take that and try to put it in the Mustang again. All right, attempt number 2 with new manifolds. It looks like it's going to fit a little bit better, so let's find out. So far, it's looking pretty good. I hear some crunching. Let's figure out what that was. Looks like the wire harness again. And I need to move it more that way. So what I like to do in this situation, instead of trying to push it up here, I like to go to the leg underneath and push it with my foot to move it that way. Just like that. Probably too far, but we'll see. Oh man, it's fitting like a glove. Like it was meant to be. Still a tight fit, but it's fitting much better. Okay. So what's going on is this exhaust manifold on the passenger side, it's hitting the strut tower a little bit. So I'm probably gonna have to lift it up, slide it back, and then drop it back down again. So guess what I'm going to have to do? I'm going to have to disconnect that steering shaft down there because this exhaust manifold is not going to slip past it. So I'll see if I can slip it off real quick. I took the steering shaft out. There's a 13 millimeter on the bottom here. Slid it off, went inside the cab of the car, and there's a 10 millimeter bolt that you have to take off the steering shaft, slide it out of the knuckle, and then there's two 12s on the firewall for this plate thing that holds it in place. Then I tried pulling it out all the way. I couldn't get the last little bit out because of the universal joint that's got a bunch of rubber on it. But for the most part, that steering shaft is out of the way. Now let's try to get this thing in. I hope I don't have to take anything else apart, but we'll see. It is a bigger engine. So it's meeting up with the transmission pretty good. It's kind of doing one of these where it's super open on the top and touching at the bottom. So I'm going to have to drop this transmission a little bit. That way they kind of form together and then I can push it in. Once I push it in, these motor mounts should slide right into place. So looks like this thing's tilting too far this way because I cannot get this motor mount to sit into place correctly. So I may have to just drop this where it's sitting right now, relocate the chain so it kind of comes forward a little bit, and try this again. With our chain moved, let's try to lift this thing up, see if we can't slide it back. And actually, the more I'm looking at this, the more I'm thinking this Hydro Boost is really in the way. There's this piece sticking up. So I'm probably going to have to go in the car, disconnect this brake booster, the Hydro Boost system, completely, and remove it from the car. This vehicle just loves fighting me. It's okay. We will get this engine in here. I am bound and determined to make this engine run in this car. So let me disconnect this Hydro Boost and we'll try to fit this in again. All right, the Hydro Boost unit is out of the car, finally. So it sits in here like this. This piece right here was hitting the valve cover and preventing it from moving over. So if you have Hydro Boost on your car, you may have to do the same thing if you're doing a 5/4 swap. Now let's try to get this engine all the way in. There should be nothing preventing us from doing this at this point because there's just pretty much nothing in the engine bay right now. So it looks like I'm gonna have to move my chain back forward again because I need this to tip down like I had it originally, but it's a learning process. And really, I've only ever read on forums that this could be done, and there's one forum specifically that's got a lot of information about doing it, but I don't remember reading anything about having to take the Hydro Boost out of this. So it is definitely a learning curve. Yeah, with that Hydro Boost system out of the way, I can move this engine this way, and there's nothing in the way. So this should drop in like normal now. Gonna grab a pry bar here, see if I can't convince this thing that it wants to be dropped into place. I am prying on the sway bar down here. So hopefully it'd be a lot easier if I had another set of hands Can you help me? Oh, wait a second. You're somewhere else. Never mind. Oh boy. If this is the way it's sitting, I am very, very concerned. Let's try to get this other side in, and hopefully there's enough room for that steering shaft. Right now it looks really tight. Well, I'm going to see if I can't hit this motor mount into place. All right, that side's good. Let's try the other one. The other side doesn't look too bad. All right. So, motor's in place. Next question is that steering shaft going to go past that manifold? I don't know that it's going to. Well, guys, I don't think this is going to be possible. I can get this in here connected and started, but if I can't steer this thing, that's going to be a problem. I just don't know how this is going to work. This manifold is too big. Just to show you what I'm looking at down here, I have steering shaft right there. There's the exhaust manifold, and there is barely any room. I mean, if you look inside there through the hole, there's another knuckle, but I don't think that that's actually going to work. Who knows? Maybe I have to put another 4.6 back in here. We'll see. I'll keep working on it, see what I can come up with, and go from there. So I was looking underneath this engine, kind of thinking about what I could actually do, and that manifold that I grabbed is for a F-150. So what I'm probably going to end up doing is pulling this engine back out, and I'm going to go with the standard Mustang manifold. It's a little bit lower profile on this side. The F-150 comes out to about here. And if you look at this, there's a curve right here, probably for that steering shaft. I will have to modify the GR tube again, but it's okay. Yeah, so let's pull this out, put this manifold on, and see what happens when we drop it in. Can we get the steering shaft around it? I'd sure hope so, because I would hate to say this is a waste of effort, you know? So, okay, let's pull it out, get this on, and let's see. So this is the answer we're looking for. As you can see, the old Mustang manifold is on the engine. It's dropped back in, and there's plenty of room down here for that steering shaft to go through. So I'm going to continue with the bell housing bolts right back there and work on stuff underneath. So I took this thing back out again. This flex plate is different. It's not just 8 bolts here, but these holes are in a slightly different location on the 4.6 flywheel. Let me show you. So if I line this thing up, If you see that top hole, it is just slightly off. So I'm going to have to drill some holes in here and try to expand this one, this one, this one, and this one to see if I can't get this thing to fit. That is one thing I did not know going into this swap on this engine. So this is what I did with this 5.4 flywheel or flex plate, whatever you want to call it. I just took these holes, made them a little bit larger, just made them slits basically. So the holes are in the exact same spot, so it could be used for truck applications still and also for this Mustang. And I find it quite interesting that there's these little bumps on the four corners. It's almost like Ford was anticipating somebody would try to stick a 5.4 in a Mustang or 4.6 application. So first I'm going to grab some lunch and then I'm going to drop this back into the car and we'll see what else I have to do that will make me pull this back out of the engine bay. So the bottom is all done except for the exhaust. There were a couple things I had to modify. These two front brackets up here for that wire harness. The 4.6 has smaller studs right there. The 5.4 is much bigger, so those had to be drilled out to fit this. There used to be a little bracket on that side that I'm not going to use anymore because the bolts are super tiny. So I'm just going to leave it the way it is. AC power steering is on. All the valve housing bolts except for the top two are in place. Motor mounts are in place. The torque converter nuts are in place. So we're sitting really, really good. The steering shaft is also in place, and let me show you how much room we have with this Mustang manifold. Look at that. I couldn't even make it better if I tried. So that is the answer. Mustang manifold on a 5.4, and that steering shaft will slip by this exhaust. The last thing I'm going to do here before I do anything to the top of this engine, I'm going to put that Hydro Boost system back in place, get all the brake lines installed and everything good on that side. I'll probably do the AC lines on this side as well. So I am going to call it a day. About 7 o'clock. I know I got a couple hours, but the sun's going down. I got a lot of stuff to clean up. And as you can see, Hydro Boost is back in place. And look at how little room there is. Just crazy. This engine is absolutely massive. It does fit, though, which I'm super excited about. AC lines are in as well. So I'm calling it a night. I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Okay, it's the next morning. Let's start in on the top of this engine. We are ahead of schedule for when I'd like to see this finished. So I'm hoping that we can attempt starting this engine today. So let's get right in. I can't wait. On the Mustang engine removal video, there was one comment I received about, why didn't you just take the coil packs off? You just broke one of them taking it out. Not necessarily true, because this boot is not attached to this. This is a removable part. And then you have your spring inside, which essentially is your spark plug wire, and this can be removed as well. With that removed, this coil pack is a unit all by itself. So there is a kit you can get with the coil on boot insulator boot set, and this will replace all of your boots. Brand new boots, brand new springs. Stick the spring in this hole right here, put the new boot on, and then you're good to go. One thing you do want to check though is clean off this top right here. A good way to tell if one of these is bad is you're going to start getting a crack right in the top here. And that's going to leak some of your spark out, and I've actually gotten poked by one of these before because of that little crack. So if there is a crack, definitely replace the entire thing. But if there's not, usually these things are okay. The crack will normally be about 95% of your bad coils, but every once in a while you will get a bad coil. But even if I did break this, I do have 8 extras of these, so I could replace it if I really had to. You can use 5-4 3-valve coils if you're in a pinch. It has the same connector. It's just this is relocated to where it's not angled. It's actually pointed down. I got yelled at for doing that in a shop once, so definitely don't do it in a shop. If you have an extra 3-valve coil pack laying around, it can be used in place of a 2-valve and vice versa. So once you get these things out of the box, this is what it's going to look like. A bunch of springs and a whole bunch of boots. Then you take a single spring and a single boot. And this coil right here is actually the one that the guy said I broke. So I'm going to prove that this is still a working coil. All you do, push that spring in there. And then you just stick your boot in. The way you can line it up, look for this little tab right here, and it's going to fit right underneath here. And there you go. There's a brand new boot. This is essentially a tune-up for this, because this will replace essentially the spark plug wire. So this is good to go. I'm going to get the other 7 finished, check for that little crack, and get these installed. None of these had any cracks, so these are good to go. All brand new boots. Let's go stick them in the car. So just to go over a couple things, the bolts for the coils, they are not stock. Edelbrock actually gives you some aftermarket bolts to fit into the coil packs, which in my opinion is probably a good idea because it's a thicker bolt and those 7mm are just terrible. But if you're taking the 7mm out, definitely keep those around, stick them in your bolt stash. They do tend to be a rare bolt. I have run into a couple problems. This bracket that holds the sensors for the EGR, there's no place back behind this intake to bolt these down. Let me show you a little bit closer. So looking in here, there's two bolt holes right there. You can see them, but they do not line up with that bracket. I've got one that was supposed to be for the spacer plate right here, but EGR tube's in the way. I also have to make sure that this can fit to it and this harness right here, this wire. So I have a very short range that I can come up with, but I'm gonna have to modify that bracket. The other bracket that I'm gonna have to modify is for the alternator. With these alternators, you want to be sure to tighten these bolts first before the top. It's possible to crack this case in half if you don't do it in that sequence. I've seen it before on multiple modular engines and all for the same reason. But this bracket right here, since I had to make the manifold wider, these two bolt holes aren't wide enough to fit there. The other issue I'm running into is, since this is a 5.4, this is lower than this is. So I was kind of looking at it, and if you line up the bolt hole there, it is very, very close to the alternator. So that means that I just have to bend this down a little bit. But if I do that, I might have to put a slot in here going this way, which is doable, and that's probably what I'm going to do. I'm also going to have to do the same thing on this side. The bolt holes line up fairly well, but I'm probably going to cut it right here, so it's not going to be a one-piece bracket anymore, but that's okay. As long as it works, I will be happy with it. So I have modified those brackets for the alternator and the EGR sensors back there, which I'll show you in a second. But I put a battery in this. I don't have a serpentine belt, no radiator, fan, nothing. But before I continue with this, I would actually like to hear this thing bark off. It is open manifold right now, so it's going to be super, super loud. I also want to make sure that when I turn the key, the pressure from the fuel doesn't start leaking at the injectors, and also that tube that we put in the middle as well. So let's try to fire this thing up. Oh, but wait, I almost forgot. Very important. Forget your oil. That would have been really bad. So I did get the cheapest oil available. It is conventional, not synthetic. You want to use conventional whenever you're doing a break-in oil change on a brand new engine. Synthetic works too well, and it's not going to let everything seat properly. So go cheap on the first one. After that 500 miles, put whatever you want to in it. You can do Mobil 1, Valvoline, Quaker State, Royal Purple, whatever you want. So I am using some 5W30, and I don't know why but the book always says only 6 quarts for a modular. I don't know about you, but every modular I've ever done has been 7. And that's what the filter changed to. Maybe it's because they're thinking you're not changing the filter too. I don't know. I don't understand. But I got 7 here, and I'm putting 7 in. All right, now let's go fire this thing up. Uh-oh. Oh, I think the battery's angry with me. Apparently, I've got to tighten up the battery cables before this thing will be happy. All right. Are you gonna be happy now? All right, let's try to blow this thing up. It'd be nice if it didn't blow up, but oh, turn the radio down. Don't need that. I'm gonna try to turn this thing over without actually fully starting it, just to build some oil pressure. Uh-oh. Well, why are you mad with me? I tightened you up. Now let's try to tighten it some more. The other thing is I boiled this battery a little bit before I stuck it in the car. So should be nice and fully charged. But let's figure that out real quick. Put a voltmeter on it. Ooh. There we go. 12.96. That's good enough to start. Let's try it again. Wow, this thing is really angry. Well, we've got a problem. I just turned the key on and it is leaking past the fuel injector. So fuel is being sprayed out, so I'm going to have to address that real quick. All right, the fuel rail is fixed now, hopefully, and I'm going to try to start it again. See what happens. I also cleaned the battery terminals. Turn the radio down again. Started to bark off there a little bit. It barked off. Let's try that again, shall we? That is loud. Starts up, got oil pressure. Now to see if that fuel rail is still leaking. Maybe that's why it wouldn't stay running. I don't have the mass airflow hooked up. Let's put the air cleaner in. I also think we have a major vacuum leak right here because this is not connected to the PCV valve. So I'm going to try to come up with something to plug this up. And it looks like we're leaking a little bit of transmission fluid. That's okay. So I cycled the key after I made the fix to the fuel rail, and I don't see any more gas spilling out, but I guess we'll find out. I'm also curious about vacuum leaks, but it's really hard to tell right now since this is not fully complete. I'm going to see now if it will run by itself. I did stick an extension in that hole to hopefully plug it up for the most part. It's not perfect, but I'm just looking to see if this thing will stay running. So let's try it again. Hopefully we don't lose too much transmission fluid. It runs and it didn't blow up. How cool is that? And again, we did lose some transmission fluid, but it can be replaced. We didn't run it completely out of fluid in the transmission, so I'm going to put this thing back together, get the exhaust hooked up, and there's a couple other parts that I need to put in here as well. I need to go get some tubes for the EGR to fit to the delta pressure sensor. The ones that were on this are too short for this application now, so I'm going to go get those. I also need to get a serpentine belt because the 461 is a different length than the 5.4. So yeah, all in all, it's looking really, really good. So I'm back from the parts store. I have my serpentine belt and hoses for the delta pressure sensor in the back over there, and a PCV hose that runs in the front right here. So I'm going to keep going on this, see if I can't get this thing done today. I do have a pipe for the exhaust as well, but that's probably going to be difficult to finish tonight, but I'll see what I can do. So this is just about finished. The top is completely done. The serpentine belt, interesting thing about that is it was an 8 rib and I needed a 6. So I just got 2 off, made it work. The water pump pulley for the Mustang wouldn't work for this because this sits way back here and the Mustang where it was riding was way out here. So had to go with the 5.4 water pump pulley for this application. So that is good to go. The alternator brackets I modified. They are smooth edges, so nobody's going to get cut on them. I bent it right here and right here, so that fits perfectly there. And essentially, same thing on the other side. Bent it here, and put that in place. So that's good to go. The delta pressure sensor back here and this other EGR sensor, I cut off the bracket right here. There used to be a bolt down on that side, but it's only got one now, and that should be sufficient. I mean, it moves just a little bit, but it does stay in place. I did have to cut this side down a little bit and make a new hole to be able to tighten this down, but it is good to go. Everything's all hooked up. The hoses right here, I got brand new since the old ones were shorter. They are ran to the pressure sensor, so that is all set. I also replaced the AC line. That's right down here. I also bent this up a little bit so it's not going to be rubbing into the AC line anymore. That's what made the old one fail. Apparently that's just what happens with the K&N filter. So the last thing that I need to do is modify this exhaust. I do have an F-150 manifold on this side and stock Mustang manifold on that side. So I need to cut off this side, put the F-150 fitting on there and weld it into place. Once I get the exhaust in place, this thing should be ready to start without sounding absolutely crazy loud. And I should be able to put coolant, power steering, brake fluid, transmission fluid, top off pretty much all of the fluids, and this thing will be fun to go down the road. I'm going to get that exhaust work done. I would show you underneath, but getting a camera underneath this car is very difficult unless I strap a camera to my head. So it's pretty straightforward. Just cut off the old fitting, weld the new one on, and bolt it all up. Alright guys, this 5.4 swap is all done. The exhaust is all welded up, and I buttoned up the rest of the things that needed to be done. I topped off all of the fluids, and this brake master cylinder, really all I had to do, there's 2 little bleeders at the top, and I just had to bleed it from that point, and I had all the brakes. So I did test it out a little bit in the driveway. It does move under its own power. I hit the throttle and it started sticking a little bit. I popped it into neutral. I hit that throttle and it started revving and I couldn't get it to stop. So I quickly shut off the key so I wouldn't blow up this brand new engine that we have. So what was happening was the throttle cable right here was hitting the hood. So if you're going to do something like this with this kind of intake, you're going to want to cut a hole in your hood right there. It's right next to the bolt hole. This thing does actually fit underneath the hood, although you can't put that heat shield under here because this just sits up way too high. And actually this part right here sits right in here, so it's almost perfect. other than that throttle cable. Let me start this thing up for you and you can take a listen to this. As you can see, it's running pretty good. No clicking, no banging. AC works, which is phenomenal. I didn't think that that would start working the way it did, but it held vacuum and I charged it up and it's working just fine. So I did have a leak right at this thermostat housing. I had to take it off, put some RTV on it, and put it back down to actually get it sealed properly. But other than that, this thing is running really, really good. Let me get you a sound of the exhaust. It is stock, but it does sound pretty good. The build is going to continue on this. I'm going to take care of the bumpers, all the faded parts of this paint job, and the rust on the fenders. Also going to replace these headlights because they are very, very fogged. The essential build is I'm going to replicate a Mach 1 with a GT. So this is going to be black. It's going to have the black emblem right here representing the Mach 1 as close as I can get. Thank you guys for following along with this build. I definitely appreciate it. If you like content like this, please give me a like and subscribe to keep up with all the current things that I'm doing. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you on the next one.